Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. This is the second devotional for today. The first covered Isaiah chapter 6. The focus of this one, Isaiah chapter 7. Now, I've given the title to this devotional, The Virgin Birth of the King, a Promise of Hope and a Sure Judgment. Well, as we continue our study, many of you are going to be very familiar with Isaiah 7 and verse 14. However, perhaps, few have focused on the context of the promise of the virgin birth. You see, the beloved promise of a sign to Judah, a miracle that only God could give, read in verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel, of course, meaning God with us. Now, we're going to take a few moments and consider the historical context of that sign and its fulfillment seen in the coming of the virgin-born Messiah, Jesus Christ. Well, Isaiah chapter 7, and I've given the heading for this chapter a title, The King is Coming. Now, we realize in chapter 6 and verse 1 that King Uzziah was dead. Now, as we come to Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 1, understand that many years have passed. In fact, reigning on the throne of Judah is not the son of Uzziah, who was Jotham, but his grandson Ahaz. Now, there were two kings named as contemporaries of Ahaz, and they conspired to invade and war with Judah. Now, we read that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it. However, they could not prevail against the capital city of Judah. And so consider then the historical context of the prophecy of the virgin birth, Isaiah 7 and verses 1 through 13. Now, King Ahaz, the grandson of Uzziah, and all Judah were terrified by the coalition of the nations aligned against them in verse 2. Now we read that Syria is confederate with Ephraim. Now Ephraim is another name for the northern 10 tribes of Israel. So Syria is confederate. They have joined in a covenant with Ephraim. Now the Lord, ever compassionate, commanded Isaiah to go with his firstborn son, Shear-Jashub, and meet King Ahaz, the king of Judah. Now the prophet's mission was to deliver good news to the king and encourage him, saying, "Take heed and be quiet. Fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands," referring to the king of Syria and the king of Israel. Don't be afraid of those kings. Now, Isaiah then revealed to King Ahaz 4 truths concerning Judah's enemies, beginning in verse 4, going through verse 9. Now, the kings of Syria and Ephraim, the northern 10 tribes, known as Israel, were contemptible to the Lord, and nothing more, verse 4, in his sight than firewood. Rezin and Remaliah had taken evil counsel, we read, against King Ahaz and Judah. And so they plotted to divide Judah between them, and they set a puppet king upon the throne of David. It gives you an insight into how far Israel, the northern 10 tribes, had fallen and how wicked they had become. They were actually yoking with Syria, a heathen Gentile nation, with anticipation of going to war against Judah and then dividing Judah and all of its riches between them. Well, nevertheless, Ahaz in verse 7 was told the confederacy between Syria and Israel would fail, and this prophecy, and in 65 years Israel would be destroyed. Now Israel being the northern 10 tribes would be destroyed, and the people taken into captivity. Verse 8. Isaiah warned King Ahaz, if you will not believe, verse 9, surely you shall not be established. Then, verses 10 through 12, Isaiah, on behalf of the Lord, offered the king Ahaz an assuring sign. Now, understanding Ahaz was not a man of faith, the Lord offered the king a miraculous sign and assured him all would come to pass as he had promised. Well, foolish Ahaz, however, refused to ask for a sign, and he sought an alliance with the king of Assyria. And so here we have now Judah seeking to be in a confederacy, an unequal yoke with Assyria, to go to war against Israel and Syria. And so here we have really what is a contemptible, sad, tragic time in Israel's history, and particularly now in Judah's history. And so the Lord said, ask for me a sign, and I will give you a sign and prove to you that I am with you. Well, there was a prophetic, miraculous sign that was given. But you see, Ahaz rejected the Lord, and he turned to his own devices to overcome Israel and Syria. And therefore God warned the kingdoms of Judah, hear ye now, verse 13, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will you weary my God also? You see, because he refused to trust the Lord, Ahaz was told that God would give his people a miraculous sign. And he said, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Now, here we have verses 15 through 25, what I would describe as the forewarning of God's judgment on Israel and Judah. You see, the fulfillment of the sign of a virgin birth son, named Emmanuel, was not imminent. In fact, 7 centuries would pass before it would be fulfilled by the birth of Jesus Christ to the Virgin Mary. So the text, however, continued, as you notice in verse 14, now continuing on 15 through 25, the prophecy continued of another son, whose name would be a testimony of a time of poverty to come. Now Ahaz was told the people's diet would be butter and honey. And by the way, verse 15, that was the food of an impoverished people. And so we asked the question, who was this second son whose birth foretold the judgment of God that would fall on Israel? Well, we'll notice in Isaiah chapter 8 and verses 1 through 3, his name revealed. Now I'm going to attempt to pronounce it. Maher-shalal-hash-baz, the second-born son of Isaiah. Now, King Ahaz foolishly established an accord with Assyria, rejecting God's offer of a sign. And so he would go to war with the heathen nation Assyria against Israel and Syria to the north. The Lord, however, warned that Assyria would not only destroy Israel, but he would ultimately use the Assyrians to punish Judah. And so Assyria would trouble Judah like the swarms of Egyptian flies and the stinging bees of Assyria we see described in verse 17 and 18. Judah would be disgraced and impoverished. And to illustrate the poverty that would befall Judah, Isaiah declared the farmers would struggle with 1 milk cow and 2 sheep, and the land would become overgrown with briars and thorns. Why is that? Because the Assyrians were enemies, and they would continue to haunt the nation of Judah. But a century would pass after Assyria took away the northern 10 tribes before Babylon came to war and conquer Judah and Jerusalem. Well, we're going to end our Bible study today with that, but continue later with Isaiah chapter 8. I do want to make a point. We will temporarily be looking at the book of Amos. I think you're going to find it exciting and instructive. Well, God bless you. Thank you for being a part of this Heart of a Shepherd, and bye-bye.